Ladies and gentlemen, I've got bad news and I've got good news. The bad news is this is a shocking update about the chess career of Magnus Carlsen. The good news is this is a shocking update about the career of Magnus Carlsen, and we all enjoy Magnus content, okay? Like, I see the comments, I'm reading them. Gotham never fails to put Magnus, up-and-coming chess players in his videos. Listen, I make the content, we all watch it. Magnus content is always appreciated here on Chess because he is the most interesting and dominant chess player, and he's currently playing in the European Team Championships, which is a team tournament where he plays with Norway, because that's the country that he represents. And he had a shocking start to this event, which we will get into in today's video. Also, today's the last day you can get merch. Today, Monday, November 13th. Last day you can place an order for the G crown or the goatee logo. If you don't buy it today, you ain't getting it. Because we want to tally up all the orders and get them out before the holiday season. So, last day to get merch. Link is in the description. You can watch the video. You can go get the merch now. If you don't get it today, you're not getting the merch. Cool? All right. Outstanding. Magnus has played 3 rounds thus far in the tournament, and this is the highlight game that I'd like to show you. His opponent is Valentin Dragnev from Austria, 2589 rated player. You might not hear too much about Dragnev because he's not yet ultra elite. He's not 2700 just yet. But very strong player. And, well, yeah. Let's watch him beat Magnus. E4 from Valentin. And Magnus plays C5, the most confrontational opening there is. He wants to play Sicilian defense. We have knight F3, knight C6. This is Magnus's pet line. This is the line that he has played in World Championships against Fabiano Caruana. That was before you were watching chess, but that was in 2018. And you can either play bishop to b5 or d4 the open Sicilian, at which point I'm not really sure what Magnus would have played, because he could play Kalashnikov, he could play knight f6 and e5, which is the Sveshnikov, he could play knight f6 and e6, which is the 4 knights, he could play knight f6 and d6, which is the classical, he could play the accelerated dragon, and he could play the Uga. This is not actually called the Uga, but I'm calling it the Uga. Bishop to b5 instead is the Rossolimo, more closed of a Sicilian, and Magnus plays e6 and knight e7. There are many lines against the Rossolimo, but in general, Black accepts the doubled pawns. In this particular line, Black actually says, you know what, I'm going to sabotage my own development very slightly. By the way, this is a really comfortable hoodie. It's tight on the wrist, it's nice. I like this. I just don't really believe in wearing my own merch outside. I feel mildly self-conscious, but I would wear the goatee one. I think the goatee does look quite nice. Anyway, you sabotage your own development, but you make sure that you're going to take back like this. And so what White does now is White goes here. And White's idea is that if Black plays a6, you no longer take. You go back to f1. Well, you basically say, look, stupid, look at what you did. Look at what you did. You thought I was going to take, so you could take. I'm not going to take. I'm just going to go back. So rook e1, and now knight d4. So Magnus spends 3 minutes. I have to tell you, I have never seen the move knight d4 in my life, ever. I've never seen this move. Because normally, since you did this, you're now going to kick out the bishop and then play knight g6. Like this I have seen, many times. Or I have seen d5, or I've seen g6, bishop g6. Like, I have never seen the move knight d4 in my life. And this is kind of Magnus's specialty. He makes players make practical decisions in the opening so that they don't necessarily remember what they're doing. You see Dragnev takes on d4, probably knowing it's the best move, and now plays c3. Clearly, White is not spending any time. Very principled approach, trying to trade off that center pawn so that if Black takes, you just go here. And I don't even have to go to f1. I could, but I could also maybe come here or here and then play d4, and White is just a little bit better. So Magnus uses this moment to kick out the bishop, and now brings the other knight to c6. So that if White plays cd, knight d4, the knight stands comfortably in the center. But instead of that, Dragnev plays b4. So still, White has not spent any time. He's going to build over here. He's going to play knight a3, knight c4, knight a3, knight c2. I can't draw arrows, but that's okay. You get the point. Magnus plays bishop e7. Now we have a4. Still Dragnev not spending any time. Still obviously quite comfortable here. Ideas of b5, ideas of expanding on the queen side, ideas of me taking a sip of my black coffee. Today's a black coffee kind of day. You have days like you want a little latte, you want a little nice little drink, you don't want too much caffeine. No, today is this is gas. This is gasoline, and I need it, all right? We're not an electric car today. Today I need black coffee. So, knight a3, takes. Dragnev still clearly in some degree of a comfort zone. Bishop f6. Magnus is the one thinking. So he attacks the pawn here, and now White plays this. So now the players are more or less on their own. Black has certain potential weaknesses, but he will look to offset them by slowly and progressively moving out of his position. Plays d6. And queen b3 is chosen by Dragnev after about 10 minutes of thought. Puts the queen on b3. Very natural follow-up will be put the rook here, and White's position is going to play itself. I mean, he has a very harmonious set of pieces. He's going to decide very soon what to do with these pawns. The knight is probably going to go to c4, where it attacks this. It could also go to e3 and then g4. This bishop patrols a lot, and really, this is like White's game to play. So he plays knight c4, and like I said, knight e3. Magnus has what we call a hedgehog setup, all right? Like kind of low and spiky, so it's very difficult for White to actually access any square. But, you know, he will access. He's going to try to look for something. Like I said, knight g4, kicks Magnus's bishop out, and now c4. Very, very nice and coordinated decision, right? Seizing control of the diagonal. And now Magnus takes the bait, plays h5. So moving a same side pawn, forcing the knight to probably get out, but it doesn't get out. Instead, Magnus... Checkmate is threatened on Magnus Carlsen while he is targeting this knight. And here, I am absolutely devastated to report that for the first time in his career, Magnus Carlsen blundered. No, he stopped checkmate. Yeah, he saw that. That's you know, we're not that. Okay, Magnus is not senile. Okay, he's just 32, which is basically 40. You know, the brain ages faster in your 30s. I'm messing around. Again, we're not at the he fell off. So you say that you fell off. That's like there's no bigger insult in 2023 than you fell off or NPC. I mean, if you call somebody NPC now, that's it. I mean, pack it up. I mean, you're gone. H4 though. Look at this. Look at this move. Pawn to H4. What a move. This is an amazing idea by Dragnev. Dragnev, clearly Gotham subscriber, by the way. Knight is hanging. Of course, you can retreat, but then Black will blockade and be very happy. But it doesn't have to do that. He could also just expand, try to take dark square control. Yeah, a great move. What's worth as much as a knight? A bishop. And that is a very nice situation. So Magnus takes on H4. Dragnev plays here. And after takes, Magnus grabs a second pawn. He just grabs a second pawn and basically says, all right, hold on to your hat. I mean, rook e3, queen g4, and Dragnev is a pawn down. He's got 5 pawns. Magnus got 6 of them. He's got a lot of pawns on dark squares, counteracting the dark squared bishop, but Dragnev has what we call a carte blanche. Carte blanche. Look at this. And all of a sudden, the best player ever is being attacked massively. Massively attacked. Rook g3. And now Dragnev is like, well, how do I plug more pieces into the attack? Bring the bishop around. The bishop is not breaking through that, but the bishop might break through over here. And also I have f4 ideas. You know, the move f4 might happen in the future. I might find a way to get my second rook there. I might find a way to trade the bishop. Because when all your pawns are in dark squares, means your light squares need to be monitored, right? Look at this, bishop e2. Look at rook g6. Now, Dragnev moves his king out of the way to bring the rook. Oh my, what a sneaky way to bring the rook. King h2, rook h1, and he brings the king back. And suddenly Magnus's king is on the run. Magnus's king going to e7 to try to bundle up for the winter, surrounded by his boys. But now queen g3 hits the pawn. Magnus's queen has to play defense. But this is very much like a tennis match. This is very much like a boxing match. Any one-on-one analogy you want to make, I'm trying to break through over here. The king is safe in the center, but the board has 3 sides. And look at this, f4. Dragnev is taking the fight to Magnus. Pawn takes, bishop takes, the pawn on d6 looking loosened up. Rook h5, seizing more squares. Queen h4, poking at the pawns. And right around here, Dragnev had a winning idea, which was pawn to a5. Sneaking in the smallest of inconveniences to loosen up this square. And after you sacrifice both pawns, you just calmly go win it back. Black's position is under-equipped. If he plays queen c8, he takes his eyes off of g7. If he plays rook c7, you lose a rook for free. And it's not a sacrifice. So all of this to say that on the 41st move of the time control, Dragnev finds a5. He finds the haymaker. He finds it at a slightly worse moment. And after knight takes a5 and queen d4, they get the extra bonus time after the 40th move. Dragnev is now down 2 pawns, but he is still bulldozing. The attack is breaking through. He was winning if he had played a5 earlier. Who knows if he would have won the game at that point, but he finds the idea a little bit later. Magnus on the defense, knight c6. The position is falling apart near Magnus's king. The g-pawn has collapsed, but now he brings reinforcements. And my friends, Magnus has to sacrifice his rook for defensive measures, but this is not the end of the story. Watch as Magnus blocks his king from checks, wins a pawn on c4, loses the pawn near the king, and I mean, just watch what Magnus has to do to survive this attack. He starts giving checks, queen h5, king g1, queen e3. Now he might still be looking for a way to play this for a win in the endgame, but Magnus Carlsen's king travels from e7 to e6 to d5 to a couple of moves later to the d4 square. Look at this. Can you imagine? The king is being bulldozed like this. Queen a7. The king runs all the way to d3 and is safe. The king is safe. Rook b7, and Magnus trades the queens with a check, and Dragnef offers a draw. He offers a draw because rook b6 would have been played, hitting both, and if you play this, then white would have played rook c6, and there would have been no easy way to protect this pawn, bishop d6, and if this, there's rook c5. So the players agree to a draw in this position before any more damage is able to be done, but it's likely going to be a draw. They could have played like 40 more moves. What a game. I mean, look at, and some of you might say, hey, you said he was beating Magnus. Yes, that was a fake spoiler. Dragnef had Magnus on the ropes. He really did. I mean, in this position, if Dragnef had found this double pawn sack idea, we might be looking at another Magnus loss to a 2500. Like, this is crazy. This has not happened in years. And it's exciting to see the players that are maybe underrated and a bit younger, like taking the fight to him, but the aura of invincibility is slightly fading, you know what I mean? And that's a wild thought. I mean, I'm enjoying watching these players completely just attack Magnus, and I'm enjoying seeing Magnus play some of this provocative chess, but it as a fan, I'm like, oh my god. You know, it is slightly terrifying. Look at what he had to do. Look at the defensive concoction that Magnus had to create with his king. His king just stood in the center of the board as Dragnef just bombed and fire punches. Now, the good news is, if you're a Magnus fan, he didn't lose. He was close, but he didn't lose, and he played two other games, one against Jurgis Pechak. Jurgis was covered in a tournament, Tata Steel, I think, at the beginning of this year in 2023. He had a rough event. And Magnus did a Magnesian thing against Jurgis. He played d4. It was a Berlin Rui Lopez, an e4, e5 in a Berlin, and the main line here is for white to lose this pawn, but Magnus played d4, which is a big sideline, like hardly ever played at the highest level. Jurgis took like this, and then tried to kick out Magnus's bishop before taking back the knight, and Magnus said no queen trade, both sides castled, and we now play the following position. Now, again, we have a Magnus heart attack. By the way, this was the first round of the tournament, just for the people are going to be like, this game was the second round of the tournament. This is how he started the tournament. And it's always fun to see how Magnus just beats like a standard, very, very, very good player, right? Jurgis is 2600. He's very good. So let's see how he does it. e5. He plays e5 because he wants to target a weakness. That's it. He just wants to create a pawn trade that will target a weakness. Black says, no thanks. So Magnus plays queen g4, targeting the pawn on e6. Black could take on e5, but then after it takes, it's a fork. Rook f7, you kind of don't want to be pinned, not to mention you will just straight up lose the pawn. So queen g4, rook f5, and now Magnus, just very simply, very straightforward, has a little bit of a weakness to work with, and has 3 pawns, and Stockfish evaluates this position as very slightly better for white, right? Cool! Let's watch. Queen c4, targets the pawn. Black defends. Knight e4! Activating the knight, targeting the bishop, and it's not just about one-move threats. It's about improving the position of the knight. And maybe I'm going to go there. Maybe I'm going to go here, right? So Jurgis doesn't want that. So now Magnus plays a very interesting idea, which is a4. a4 does a couple of things. Number one, it stops anything from going to b5, queen trade or otherwise. Number two, you want to play a5, and then you want to play a6 to soften up that structure. Number three, you want to go rook a3. you actually have an idea to bring your rook into the game through the third rank. So like if black plays a5, white very well could go here. I mean, it's a very reasonable move. So a4 is a very interesting multi-purpose move, which is why black plays, you know, knight d5, trying to centralize. Now Magnus plays this, restricting all of these pieces from that square. Queen can't really come in. Black stops the plan. Now c3 limits rook a3. You're probably not going to do that. So now g3, limiting even more squares on that side of the board. Very slow game. Black plays h6. Kind of a non-committal pawn move. You know, you think a little bit, I don't know what to do. h6. Nothing can go to g5 now. Magnus plays bishop d2 because he hasn't developed his bishop yet. Queen b2 is possible, but after rook b1, queen c2, rook takes b7, you probably don't want to mess with 3 isolated pawn islands, because I'll take, and then you'll lose everything. So rook e8, now Magnus goes here, just bringing all the pieces. You still can't take the pawn on b2, to the point that Magnus says, you know what, take the pawn on b2, bro. And now for reasons I don't fully understand, Jurgis said, Magnus, bozo, I can take the pawn on b2. Big decision. Big decision calling the bluff. Because even though Magnus cannot play rook to b1, he can go here. So now he targets the queen's gonna move, and then this bishop is obviously going to retreat. But the real story here is like, why did black, there was no need to do this. I mean, black could have played like let's say black does nothing. You know, white might go here and try to play like c4, bishop e3, but I mean, we are far from something major happening in the game. But queen b2, now some very major is going to happen in the game. So now the threat is something like a bishop c5, leaving the queen to die. So for example, g6, bishop c5, queen's just trapped. And that was a major thing that needed to be avoided. I think black probably should have returned to b6, but instead he does this, and Magnus correctly forces, more or less, a trade of knight for bishop. And now Magnus has a major advantage. In this position, actually, him giving up the bishop opens up things for white. It doesn't slow things down. Normally, you would think a bishop is better than a knight. And normally, a bishop is better than a knight, but not in this position. I mean, that knight was the glue. That knight was the glue of the black position. It's like giving away a very good player on a team, right? That was just like a glue player. And now, it's going to be tough. And now we advance on the same side. And the idea of advancing on the same side is that the king is still safe. And the knight is going to g5. And when the knight goes to g5, it's going to pressure e6, which now the queen pressures because this knight disappeared. So everything Magnus does sort of flows into one another. It's a very coordinated thing, and Jurgis does his best, but it's a simultaneous dark squared approach by white, a light squared approach by white, targeting the light squares while standing on the dark squares. Very, very nice approach. Rook f3. Now you can't even come back. The black rook was on f5, strong, and I zigzag you. You can't go here because of the pin. Rook f7 is a major threat, and rook f8 looks like it stops me. But watch this. The second you take your eyes off h7, look, your king takes your eyes off h7, not knight h7. A lot of you like one movers, but chess is not about one movers. Queen e4. That's the point. It's about this, but also queen h7. So if I come back and defend, that's great, but the queen's getting in here, and it's not about the knight. It's that the queen is going to do all this damage. Queen e4 is a very nice move. And yeah, Jurgis is just like half a step behind, and now he is a full step behind. So he's going to lose his pawn on e6 with check, and he's going to lose this pawn, so he's just down 2 pawns. And pawn's going to go. Now Jurgis could play on, but he resigns. He could play on. I mean, he could play like rook e7, and then he could move his rook to like h7, but it's just a matter of time. Knight d6, rook d1. Magnus will find a way to trade the piece. He's going to win the game. How did Magnus win this game? Very tense position. It was a very tense position, and finally Jurgis just decided to relieve it, to like make something happen. He didn't have to go for this. He probably could have just stayed, but again, it was going to be a slow grinding process of Magnus targeting a pawn which was a weakness created from the opening. Like in this position, right here, Jurgis decided, I'm going to trade, and Magnus said, pawn to e5, good luck defending this pawn in the long term. I'm going to initiate a pawn trade with you, which is going to trade off your d-pawn and create an isolated pawn. Like, Magnus could have went like b3, let's say, and then after something like e5, we would have had a very different type of structure, right? Or even d5, e5 would have been different. At least this would have been all together. But by forcing a trade, like slowly like this, that is what he focused on the whole game, and he won a very, very nice and clean one. And then actually earlier today, November 13th, He just finished the game against Hjörvar Gretarsson, who is one of the best players in Iceland, if not the highest rated player in Iceland. I'm not exactly sure. This one, another Spanish, not a Berlin, D3, kind of an anti-open Spanish. You don't want black to take this pawn. And then this very provocative line, bishop g5. This is a really nice game that Magnus played, very instructive game. So you should watch it, and you should get your merch orders in because the store closes today. H6, and the reason why this is a very kind of provocative and aggressive line is that white brings the bishop here, and that bishop is a target. So, for example, if black, if let's say, you know, something like this in castles, black is going to go g5, and then after this, black doesn't even have to castle. He can, and like let's say white just plays a bunch of lazy moves. Black can play king g7, and let's say you play like bishop c2. You're just not doing much. Then black will play like rook g8. Bring the knight out, h5, like just, you know, knight h7, h5, h4. Like there are crazy lines here for black, where black will just throw all the pawns forward. So this is deliberately doing this because he knows he's gonna get a game out of this. G5, and you know, he knows like by doing this, it's like, okay, I have a chance to create a provocative position where I can dominate. Okay, and it doesn't always work. All right, that game against Dragnev was crazy. Like Dragnev played out of his mind. H4, amazing move, and now you know Magnus plays knight f1. So by committing all of his pawns to the dark squares, I've already talked about this. The light squares are very weak. You know, if a very bad decision by black would be to play this move and then take back with the queen, right? Now the computer still justifies it, but I would like to think, and the computer justifies it by playing very dynamically, but f takes e6, to my eyes, looks much safer because you cover yourself. Because look, if you play queen e6, again, it's equal, but just from a long-term positional standpoint, if black is unable to deal with these weaknesses, white is gonna just park the horses there. Park them, and it's going to be very happy. Computer is always, you know, computer's always like, it's fine, I'll figure it out. But as you can see, Magnus is trying to exploit these, and he's looking to get taken. That would be an even worse decision, because what will happen then is now you have no patrol of these squares. At least with a pawn or a queen, you have some patrol, right? Then you can go, but it's slow. So bishop to e6, knight e3, right? And now Gretarsson says, you know what? I don't even like where this knight is. I don't like the knight. I'm going to give away my bishop for the knight so that your knight can now no longer get to those squares. Not a terrible decision per se, but very committal. And as you can see, Magnus hasn't done much. Magnus played an opening which made his opponent play provocatively, and now he's like, well, if you play provocatively like this, but then you don't get anything out of it, it's just weaknesses. It's like a power puncher in boxing. If you burn out all your energy, but you don't get a knockout, or you don't even hurt your opponent, now your muscles have lactic acid in them, right? You can't swing them as much, and you're technically not as sound. So what Magnus is trying to accomplish here, and he pulls something off very nicely. Knight d2. He's got ideas to transfer the knights in place. He's trying to utilize this f-file. Bishop g4, and he's looking potentially to attack over on the dark squares. Now he does something very funny. Oof. He plays knight f3. Knight f3 has a hidden agenda. Okay, f5 is weak. But why does that matter? Like, why did he go back in this position? What was the point? Well, the point is that now he can sneak into his opponent's position. How can this knight safely land on f5? How? I mean, you could bribe your opponent not to take you, but how are you going to get to f5? Well, sometimes your opponent's defenses are an illusion. In this position, Magnus Carlsen played knight to h4. He did not need to bribe this pawn not to take. It was the open f-file combined with this pin that would have won him the game if the knight got taken. So now his opponent has to deal with the arrival of the knight on f5. And now, very important, you never take to undouble. You never take with the pawn here. Again, superseding concepts in chess. Oh no, I've got doubled pawns. I've got to undouble them. No, stop sounding like Stewie Griffin. You gotta get the rook in there. The rook is pressuring everybody. The pawns clog the center. They disallow black any access. superseding concepts. The hardest part is in chess is, of course, realizing when the superseding concepts should be utilized. Now, you may ask yourself, why did Magnus not play knight h4 in this position? Because there was knight e4. What? But what about this? Then this would have been taken. Now the queen would have added a layer there. By doing it the way he did it in the game, there is no knight takes e4 because the king is here. Knight f5, there's no bishop. There's no bishop covering. You understand? There's no bishop covering. By getting the bishop to zigzag, Magnus now gets this position. And now, watch as Magnus shows how two bishops can destroy a position that has two knights. Knights love closed positions. The fact that both sides here have 8 pawns means the position is closed. But watch as Magnus slowly, methodically opens up the position for his bishops, opens up the position for his queen and rooks, and utilizes any available empty space to his advantage. Queen e2, light squares. Magnus goes for the light squares. Magnus brings the rooks. f6. Position is rock solid on dark squares, but here comes a pawn knocking on the door, a permanent overloading of the nervous system. The knight comes back. Magnus says, I will not give you my rook. Bishop c2, ready to advance with pawns when necessary. h5, a massive decision. You permanently prevent yourself from getting in on that side of the board, but you're fighting for the light squares. Pawn to d4. I'm just advancing. I'm advancing and taking your space away. Knight to d7. Now I go back with my bishop to patrol the entire diagonal. Rook d8. Now I advance again with my pawn. Magnus firing away on all 3 sides of the board. Very, very instructive stuff. f5. Black tries to create havoc. He tries to create counterplay, but you're opening the position for the bishops and the queen and the rooks. This is a very dangerous decision, which is why the eval went up by nearly 2x. Black should have just sat there and waited White's arrival and tried to defend himself, but he just couldn't help him. Now Magnus immediately rips open the center. The king comes to play defense. Now Magnus glues the position shut. He's a pawn up. He's not letting go. Pawn takes b5. Queen takes b5. No queen trade. Why? Because we're going to slowly expand. We're going to slowly get the queen out. Now, look at this pawn move. You know what pawn b3 is trying to do? You think we're... No. Rook rotation. We bring the rook all the way to a2. All right? Now we play e4. Now we play e4 to make sure everything stays protected, and we have control of this diagonal with the bishop. Here comes the bishop. We lose this pawn, but by taking this pawn, you proceed to open the position even more, because now rook c2. So you took my pawn, but you opened up the position even more for my pieces. Bishop d5, knocking. Hello, the knight's got to move. The knight moves. Magnus breaks into c7. And it's just too little too late. The pieces protecting the king and the castle will slowly be picked off one by one while I go for the weaknesses over there. But it's not even about the pawn. It's that the rook cannot be traded. Because if you try to go after my rook, you'll see what's going to happen. Rook c3 played by black. Bishop c4. And if you try to take, I have bishop d4, and also I'm hitting the pawn on d6. Bishop d4. I don't even want the rook because I would have walked into a fork there. So rook c4. Knight c6, and now very calm, rook h7. Magnus goes after this, at which point the king will collapse. All these pieces, unfortunately, were not able to defend the king against the infiltration of the bishops and the rooks, and just a very instructive game about how to take a very slight positional advantage and just hammer it home. So the good news is, Magnus hasn't fallen off yet. But the crazy news is, these 2500s are coming at him like never before. I mean, it is wild how many of these young, strong 2600 GMs are just going after Magnus, and how hard it is to stay consistent with black. And it's one of the reasons he's not the top performing chess player in 2023. It's just not. You know, he's just not. So I think he's like number 2 or 3. He has more wins than he has draws, which is ridiculous at top level, but he has more losses this year. Well, we will continue to cover the tournament. We will continue to cover impressive games from the European Team Championship. And if you're in London, I'm coming to London, November 16th to 22nd. Link is in the description for all those events. You can sign up, get a signed copy of the book, come to an event. And then Toronto in December, tickets coming soon for that. Last day to get the merch. Last day to get the merch. And if you don't have the merch, then that's fine. Thanks for watching today's video. I'll see you in the next one. Get out of here.